Let me in, Pike. I'm hungry. God, that was cheesy. All right, welcome back to the next edition of the Rancor Pit. Well, I told you guys that I was going to go ahead and switch from D&D 3.5 to Star Wars RCR, and I'm going to switch from Star Wars RCR. This is just one aspect of White Wolf's Old World of Darkness. This is Vampire the Masquerade. Technically, third revised. Alright, so there's going to be a little explanation portion of this video because not everyone knows who and what White Wolf is and was. It didn't receive the mainstream popularity that TRS and then Wizards of the Coast inevitably did for D&D. And Wizards of the Coast also created, Star Wars RCR. It didn't receive the huge amount of immediate praise because I think when Gary Gygax first created D&D, because he started in the 70s and he used the old medieval fantasy setting, that's what gave him the biggest edge at the time because it's what people wanted to hear about. White Wolf didn't do that until later. White Wolf actually set its time frame in the here and now, or roughly the early 90s. And its major flagships at the time were Vampire the Masquerade and Werewolf the Apocalypse. We have that book here. Actually, we have quite a few Old World of Darkness books. Really only missing the secondary supplements, like all of the clan books, all of the tribe books, and stuff like that. For the most part, we got all the core stuff. We just don't regularly play it anymore. I started playing it back... I started trying it back in 97, and then I really picked up playing it in 98. And back at the time, white-wolf.com actually had its own online real-time chatting service that was done into rooms that you can enter into as a lobby and then make private rooms for separate games. And they use the moderated stuff, which means people who consider themselves to be storytellers, which, by the way, ST, yeah, that's White Wolf's version of a DM, or a GM in Star Wars, consider themselves to be STs, and they ran strict by the rules, by their system, by their time frame, and their occurrences, locked games that you had to apply for, make a character sheet for, get approved for, and 100% keep track of all of the XP you gained and everything that happened with your character. Very inside the box structured, right? But it was online gaming. The other side of that is on the same site, they also created the unmods, which left everything up to freeform, and the first room you entered into was the entryway, and everybody had to go through that portal in the first place, and you could literally just hang out there all day. You could talk shit, you could dick around, you could create disturbances, you could just be an idiot, you could be, that guy. You could just hang around all day in the entryway lounge and not do any gaming, but you could discuss anything underneath the sun. On the sidebar of that, they had all of these rooms. A lot of them were pre-made that the developers created. Club Fetish was one of the more popular rooms, and that room was usable by anything that White Wolf had created, which did span from vampires and werewolves to other changing breeds all the way up to demons and mages and fae and all that other stuff. But it was one of the determined rooms that it gave a description, and it was always there, and you couldn't lock it. Anybody can come through it and do whatever they wanted to. The way the online gaming worked is you had to basically respect the scene that was going on, because if there was already people in there, one or more of them were an ST, and they had gathered these people in there for the purposes of using it for their particular scene or whatever they were doing. It let STs chronicle games easier, as opposed to being extremely rigid, extremely, inside the box and doing things by a formula. But it also attracted a lot of idiots that would come into the scene, you know, Main Street, the city core, Main Street, would just start walking around with a katana brandish, not expecting, the cops or anything else to show up in the world of darkness. And it just, it left a lot of room for imagination amongst other things. And it blew my mind whenever I first saw it, because I knew about D&D. I hadn't played it all that much, but I knew about it. And I knew how different it was. And then when I first tried White Wolf, it was Vampire the Masquerade. It was a character that was given to me. And I didn't mesh with it, but I wanted to learn more about it. That's what the immediate spark was. And because it was back in the day, they started their stuff in the early 90s, hardcore, getting into second edition and then third revise in the early to mid 90s. And I started in the late 90s. It was fresh. It was 5-6 years into publication. It was still in publication. The core books, like, the Vampire the Masquerade book, it was still in publication. Not like a D&D book where, 3.5 came out and you didn't end up buying it until sometime later, Let me just actually check the publication date on this, because I can give you a little more accurate description. Where the hell's the pre-contents? Every book has a story in front of it, especially the core books. So I guess it's buried. How to use this book? Where in the hell is the publication date, Vern? Anyway, I'll come across it eventually. Yeah, there it is. 1998. Yeah. That's and one of the cool things was, that there's like the enter page of it. The cool thing was, where is it? Way down in the corner. Focus, it's right there. Printed in Canada. Cool. I was playing this way before I came up here, but White Wolf was cool because it wasn't D&D. And I didn't really ramp up playing Star Wars until after all of this. Even after I got back into D&D again, strictly. So it was vampires. It was the world of darkness. It was a place where mortals were in severe danger. And at any turn could have their sanity snap by seeing something, seeing a vampire feed, seeing, a Sabbat tear somebody apart, seeing an anarchist ride by on a Harley, throw a grenade into a coffee shop and see a whole bunch of people blow up. The sanity of mortals would just snap. You'd go into delirium is what they call it. And you'd have to deal with pure madness and stuff like that. And it was all a different system because it didn't use, the conventional dice. It just used D10s. That's all. Everything was done on the character sheet. I'll show you the one I have here on hand. Now, this is an Elysium sheet. That means it is a sheet designed for elders. That's why there's a lot of dots. Usually, everything goes up to 5. Willpower can go up to 10. Humanity can go up to 10. And the blood pool would be like 2 lines shorter, because your generation dictates what your blood pool can be at max. And usually elders have eaten other vampires to the point where they've gained their power and dropped in generation. So, even the character sheet you can plainly see. Now, you guys have seen this before, because if you watch my channel, you would have seen my Ghostbusters character sheet, and you can plainly see where I got the inspiration from. I pretty much used an Elysium sheet and then modified it to my whims. But, you have to... if you know, like, original D&D rules, you'll know the terms point by. It's sort of like that, but not. It's just, you look at what statutes you have. You have to decide what's going to be your primary, what's going to be your secondary, what's going to be your tertiary. Your primary gets the most, your secondary gets the medium, or the medium amount. The tertiary gets the last amount. And then you just simply dot things in. Stereotypical mortals have, like, 2s in everything. So if 5 is your strength max for a normal mortal, 2 strength, 2 dex, 2 stamina. You see? Willpower would be 7, because that's how we think. If we have to kill somebody as human beings, they did a lot of forethought into this, actually. I will give him that. If you have to kill somebody as a human, you're going to feel extremely guilt-ridden, especially if it's not altogether warranted and it may very well have had other outcomes. You know, that's guilt. That's your willpower not being able to keep up with you, you know. The people who made White Wolf did a huge and extensive amount of research. Whenever it came to vampires, for all the lore, they even pulled stuff out of, you know, the original Bible, talking about Cain, talking about his mark, talking about how he existed in the aftermath of what he did. And then you get into Werewolf the Apocalypse, all of the tribes and all of the lore that comes from, you know, the Wendigo that was up here in Canada, the feral spirit, all the way down to the wolf worship that the, like, where Latin America and Central America kind of combined in that area, the aspect of the wolf and whatnot. They did a huge amount of research for all walks of, like, spiritual, you know, existence, and then occult lore for vampire, and it's really, really well done. So once you actually learn White Wolf, it clicks. It becomes easy. See, D&D, you got a lot to deal with. You got a bunch of numbers. You got, you know, 12 different books to go look for feats. You got all these skills, especially if you're a rogue. You know, it's easier on a rogue, you know, when you're playing a rogue to mark off the skills you don't have. And you get all this equipment. You got to deal with gold. You know, it's making a D&D character is really, really in-depth. White Wolf streamlined it because they had to. They had to make it different. And boy, did they ever make it different. And when I first started, I went into the unmods, and my first character, unadvisedly, I made a vampire that was from the clan called the Assamites. They're assassins from the Middle East. Well, Middle East for the most part. I went for, like, one of the most difficult to deal with clans. I do that for some reason. I did it with Vampire the Masquerade whenever we switched to Werewolf the Apocalypse. My first werewolf I made was a Shadow Lord. Those guys were, like, from Transylvania and Middle Europe, and they're highly untrustworthy, and they're sneaky, and they lie, and they manipulate. And I really should have stuck to something a little more domestic, or easier for that matter. And then for the changing breeds, for, like, the Farah, for Beta, I chose the hardest and most difficult and most in-depth changing breed I could. My first Farah character was actually a Mokle, and that is a were-dragon. And they are one of the most difficult ones to learn because of how in-depth everything is. And when I chose that, I hadn't been gaming for very long on a constant basis. So, but the cool thing was, whenever I started, you know, gaming White Wolf, all of my friends in high school were doing it too. And new stuff was coming out then. And it kind of gave me an idea of what the guys back in, you know, in the original D&D, whenever they were playing, like, you know, second edition D&D, and then they were in high school, and then second AD&D came out. All this advanced stuff and the expansions and everything. That must have just, you know, made them wild, where World of Darkness did the same thing for me, because it was crazy, it was new, it was all these different directions you can go into, all of this lore you can consider. And as much as I, you know, I don't want to say I don't want to admit it, but as much as I have to own up to it, it was White Wolf in all of its aspects that actually prompted me to, you know, break out of my player's shell and start actually STing. And STing led it into DMing. And DMing led it into GMing. So I started with White Wolf. And I played a lot. I even went so far as when I was in high school, I would basically say, okay, I'm going to go spend, you know, the weekend over at one of my friend's house, and I would get on their bus, not my own, their bus on a different route. We'd have to do the whole note exchange with the driver. No, I'm going here. I'll be, you know, this, that, and the other. And I'd like to spend the whole weekend. That Friday night, we would game all the way until dawn, and then we would go do a dawn walk. We'd come back. We'd finish up any kind of soft RP we had left over, which is a term, soft RP is. And then we'd, like, crash at, like, 6 or 7 in the morning, and we'd sleep to the afternoon. You know, that was my hardcore gaming time, was sophomore, junior, and senior year in high school. And I gamed a lot. In that time frame, however, I unfortunately had to come to the realization that not all players are created equal, and not all STs are created equal. And through a process of noticing things, noticing attitudes, and then being excluded from games, I finally had it out with my ST. And that story is old and tragic, and I'm not going to go into it. But needless to say, I broke away from the troop, and I started to do my own stuff. And that's when I think I really started to become an ST, a storyteller, is because I started to look at everything. I would sit down with a book, and I mean, D&D books are big. Some D&D books are thin. These books are not thin. Okay? I used to sit down and just read these. Not pick through them and read, I'm going to pick out this client, this particular. No, literally, like starting from page 1, I would go through and read these books, cover to cover, like they were a novel. And all of that crap got stuck in my head, and permanently at that. And I picked up and I started STing. And I went directly back to the unmods. And everybody that I inevitably gamed with online all came to me because they wanted to either be a part of a game that they had heard about or wanted me to run something for them and their crew, one of the two. I spent the better part of my junior year and majority of my senior year STing for people. Now, granted, I was using my own characters, but I ran things wholly. And this was like people that had been pre-established for like 3 or 4 years on that particular unmod chat come to me and say, hey, we've heard about what you were doing, my most famous online character, and we want you to either be a part of our group or let us join you so we can run through your rooms, because you could password lock them. So I would basically use a universal password that I'd say, anybody who knows how to get in here, use the password, come in, and we'll set the scene and do, some gaming. And people would come through all the time who knew it. So I didn't have to continuously spit out the passwords and whatnot. But they were coming to me on a constant basis. And it got to the point where I would be having to do like 2, 3 screens at the same time, different characters, different rooms, different games. This would be vampire. This would have been, werewolf. This would have been something for John, my most famous online character. I'll talk a little bit about him, but I'll get more into his detail next vid, I think, because while he wasn't my first, he definitely was my most influential, who I identify with, who I put most of my psyche into. See, whenever you make characters for like D&D and Star Wars, you can try to put a bit of yourself into them. You can. And you could totally make a fully flavorful character. Fog. I spoke about Fog. Fog, my half-orc paladin, to Heronius, my half-orc paladin Kensai. I put a piece of me into him, and that's why he's so rich and flavorful, and I'd love to get back to him. But whenever it came to White Wolf characters, I guess it was because it was like a modern time. You could see yourself doing this. I put much, much more into my characters when I ran White Wolf games, and my characters became chat-wide known. And that's not even me being cynical. That's the truth. I had quite a number of different fair characters. I had a number of, werewolf characters, guru characters too. I had a couple of hunters that were very well known. And I had a bunch of vampires that were known. So it's not like, I'm trying to do this to inflate my own ego, because I'm not. The truth of it is, people were coming to me on a constant basis to, we're going to do this scene today, and then next week I'll be able to get everybody back on, and we'll get back into a room, and then we'll go ahead and do the big part of the storyline. And I'm like, you want me to run it, don't you? I'm like, yeah, so, all right, fine. John, or Johnny, as it were, John Oso. Anybody who speaks Spanish out there knows that Oso means bear. Ding, ding. He was my Grawl. Gurahl. Grawl. Grawl are werebears. They're big. They're really strong. They're slow in the physical sense. And they deal with a lot of healing and care and succor. And I identified most with Grawl whenever I ran through them and looked at everything and read everything I possibly could. That was the first breed book that I bought, was the Grawl breed book. Right behind that was the Mowgli breed book, but the first one I actually bought was the Grawl one because I wanted to sit down and I wanted to read it cover to cover, and I did. I must have read it 50 times. And there goes my Rancor. And John was a park ranger that I specifically made a room for, that I had a whole backstory made out for how he got there, why he got there, where he was, where he came from. And every time I locked that room, sometimes I didn't even lock it. Sometimes I left it open. I wanted to see who actually would wander through and would play. Every time I made that room, though, people knew it was me. Even if they didn't know it was me, they knew it was me. They knew it was John. They knew it was that storyline and everything that came with it. And I had to eventually retire John. I played him so long that it turned out that the next generation, his kids, I ended up playing his kids too. And that spanned from like 99 to 2006. 7 years, and I was constantly gaming. I was constantly storytelling. So John, however, is my most treasured character of all time. I do have his sheet somewhere. I think it's up there in my salt and pepper, my old binder. Anyway, I'll talk more about him next time, and some of his good friends, and some of the exploits he used to get into. And the good news is, it's mostly up in my head. I don't remember. For D&D, I had notes and things written out and stories and all this shit. All of this is in my head since 97. So I can tell you stories. That's kind of my deal. And I'll explain a few things next time to let you know why I became such a good storyteller and dungeon master and game master. It all does make sense, I promise. So until then, we'll go ahead and end this episode. And if you liked it, please give it a like, thumbs up, and subscribe. And please share it, spit it anywhere you want to across the net. I got my Twitter account. I always repost. I always repost my family vlog too. But I repost there. I repost on Facebook. And get the word out. So till next time, grab your dice and roll initiative.